हरि ओम नमः सर्वेभ्यः। अष्टाध्यायी परिचयः इत्यस्य वर्गस्य अद्य तृतीयः पाठः। अस्मात् पाठात् वयं वर्णानाम् अध्ययनं प्रारभामहे। आदौ वन्दनं। शुक्लाम्बरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। येनाक्षरसमाम्नायमधिगम्य महेश्वरात् कृत्स्नं व्याकरणं प्रोक्तं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः। वाक्यकारं वररुचिं भाष्यकारं पतञ्जलिं पाणिनिं सूत्रकारं च प्रणतोऽस्मि मुनित्रयम्। वर्गस्य प्रयोजनद्वयम् आदौ स्मारयामि। प्रथमं तु अष्टाध्याय्याः आहत्य 400 सूत्राणां व्याख्यासहितम् उदाहरणसहितं च अध्ययनं। द्वितीयम् अष्टाध्याय्यः प्रथमाध्यायस्य प्रथमपादस्य कण्ठस्थीकरणम्। I'm going to remind this in the beginning of every class. At the appropriate time, I'll inform how to go about these. प्रारभामहे। प्रारंभे किञ्चित् पुनरावर्तनं कुर्मः। So this time in the Punaravartanam, I am going to ask a few questions and you will have to answer. So be prepared. So अस्यां पाठ्यशृङ्खलायां आदौ अस्माभिः व्याकरणम् इति शब्दस्य व्युत्पत्तिः अदृश्यत। व्याक्रियन्ते इत्युक्ते प्रकृतिप्रत्ययरूपेण पृथक् क्रियन्ते शब्दाः येन साधनेन तत् साधनं व्याकरणम् अस्ति। शब्दानां प्रकृतिप्रत्ययरूपेण द्विधाकरणस्य साधनं व्याकरणम् अस्ति इति आशयः। तदनन्तरम् अस्माभिः व्याकरणसम्बन्धीनि कानिचन प्रसिद्धवाक्यानि दृष्टानि। लक्ष्यलक्षणे व्याकरणम् इति प्रथमम्। लक्ष्यम् इत्युक्ते अन्तिमः शब्दः, लक्षणम् इत्युक्ते सूत्रम्, लक्ष्यं च लक्षणं च एतत् समुदितं व्याकरणं भवति। ततः शब्दानुशासनं नाम शास्त्रं व्याकरणम्, शब्दानाम् अनुशासनम् इत्युक्ते प्रतिपादनम् इति व्याकरणस्य अपरं नाम। तदनन्तरं प्रयुक्तानाम् अन्वाख्यानं व्याकरणम्। भाषायां प्रयुक्तानां शब्दानां साधुत्वज्ञापनम् इति व्याकरणस्य मुख्यं कार्यं, मुख्यं प्रयोजनं वर्तते। अतएव प्रयोगशरणाः वैयाकरणाः। शरणाः मीन्स् रक्षकाः। प्रयोगस्य रक्षकाः वैयाकरणाः सन्ति। यथा भाषायां प्रयोगः विद्यते तथैव व्याकरणस्य नियमाः अपि कर्तव्याः इति अत्र आशयः। तदनन्तरं पूर्वस्मिन् पाठे शब्दविचारस्य विषये अस्माभिः दृष्टं। व्याकरणे शब्दान् अधिकृत्य द्वाभ्यां प्रकाराभ्यां चिन्तनं कृतमस्ति। एकं तु प्रत्येकं शब्दस्य विषये पृथक् पृथक् प्रकृतिप्रत्ययविभागरूपेण चिन्तनं, तथा च द्वितीयं शब्दनिर्माणविषये, शब्दनित्यत्वविषये, शब्दार्थसम्बन्धस्य विषये चिन्तनम्। एतस्मिन् एव सन्दर्भे शब्दानां प्रकृतिप्रत्ययविभागं तथा च अर्थम् अधिकृत्य चत्वारः विभागाः अपि अस्माभिः दृष्टाः। So let us do a quick revision over here. We have the four categories that we discussed in the previous class: Yaugikaha, Rudhaha, Yoga Rudhaha, and Yaugika Rudhaha. Let's take one by one. I want people to raise their hands and explain me, maybe in one or two lines, what a particular term means, along with, say, one or two examples. So let's start with Yaugikaha. Anybody who wants to explain can raise their hands. Others should take down their hands.
Namaste, Acharya. Mama Naam Ratnakar.
2 minutes. I'll allow people once they raise their hands, and then you can speak. There's nobody who wants to explain. We can ask. Okay, Srinivasa Mahoday, you can explain what Yaugika words are.
यौगिकशब्दाः ते सन्ति येषां प्रकृतिप्रत्ययविभागेन यः अर्थः प्राप्यते सः एव अर्थः भाषायामपि उचितः योगः।
उपयुज्यते, प्रयुज्यते। सत्यं। किम् उदाहरणं?
राजपुत्रः,
राजपुत्रः,
पाचकः।
पाचकः। उत्तमं। तत्र व्याख्या अस्माभिः दृष्टा आसीत् अवयवशक्त्या अर्थबोधकत्वं यौगिकत्वं. So try to memorize these particular sentences They might look complex at this point in time, but later on they'll prove to be very useful. Thank you very much. द्वितीयमस्ति रूढशब्दाः. पूर्णिमा भगिनी.
नमस्ते महोदय. योगरूढशब्दाः इत्युक्ते
No, just the
तेषामपि
रूढशब्दाः.
रूढशब्दाः ये प्रपञ्चे वयं किं we use them regularly. तेषां प्रकृतिप्रत्ययविभागः करणीयम् इति नास्ति.
करणीयमिति नास्ति, नो चेत् प्रकृतिप्रत्ययविभागेन सम्बन्धः नास्ति. किम् उदाहरणम्? दित्थ. So there are very peculiar examples. रथंतर इति एकम् उदाहरणमस्ति. सामवेदे यानि ये श्लोकाः सामवेदे वर्तन्ते तत्र रथंतर इति श्लोकसमूहस्य नाम तत्र दत्तमस्ति. No chet you have dith, ha ha, hu. So very typical names are examples of these rudha words. Okay, somebody else. Yoga rudha shabdaha naam kim? Krishna Kumar Mahodaya. Anjali Lele Bhagini, you can.
Namaste Mahodaya.
श्रूयते वा महोदय, श्रूयते वा?
श्रूयते. We'll take one by one. So Krishna Kumar Mahodaya, you can speak for Yoga Rudha, and Anjali Bhagini, you can speak for the next one, Yaugika Rudha. See,
Yoga Rudha basically, although it is very generic, but it may specify only one particular variety. For example, Pankajam, right? Pankajam. Correct. What comes out of Pankajam could be many plants, but Pankajam refers to one blue lotus. So one specific. That's what Yoga Rudha means. Correct. Uttamam. So not just the plant. Panke ajayata. Anything that is born in the mud is eligible to be called as Pankaja. But what we use that word is for a type of blue lotus. Or specific. Correct. Yes. So avayavartha samvalita samudaya shaktya atra artha bodhakatvam bhavati iti ashayah. Uttamam. The last category. Uttamam. The last category, Yaugika Rudha words. Anjali Lele Bhagini, if you want to answer this, you can unmute. If not, we can have somebody else. Ruchi Bhagini, you can answer this.
Yaugika Rudha Shabdaha yasya dvau athava adhikaha arthaha santi.
Uttamam.
Ekah eva shabdaha keshuchit अर्थेषु यौगिकः अन्येषु अर्थेषु अन्येषु अर्थेषु रूढः अस्ति. किम् उदाहरणं? पतञ्जलिः इति अस्ति. अश्वगन्धा इति व्याख्यानेषु दत्तम् उदाहरणं वर्तते. अश्वगन्धा नाम एका वनस्पतिः अपि अस्ति, किञ्च अश्वगन्धा इति अश्वस्य गन्धा एव गन्धा यस्याः. So the definition would be Avayava-shaktya, Samudaya-shaktya cha pruthak artha-bodhakatvam. Uttamam. Nice. Now there is something that I want to discuss specifically about these Yaugika Rudha words. So let me talk about that and then go ahead. So actually after the previous class, there was an interesting question that was asked by someone. The question was that the Yaugika Rudha words, as we saw just now, are the words which have one meaning based on the Prakriti Pratyaya Vibhaga, and the other meaning which has nothing to do with Prakriti Pratyaya Vibhaga, so it is completely Rudha. Now it turns out that people can randomly pick up any word in Sanskrit language and then they can use it as a name of, say, their kid or their house, their company, their pet, and so on. So for example, we mentioned that the word Rajaputra was actually Yaugika word. But then what would happen if somebody names their son as Rajaputra? If they do that, then suddenly Rajaputra now has two meanings, one Yaugika and other Rudha. So immediately it becomes Yaugika Rudha word. And we can do this exercise for literally every word in Sanskrit language, which means that all the words in the Sanskrit language will become Yaugika Rudha words. So understand this. This is a problem. In fact, the example that we gave just now, Patanjali, that became Yaugika Rudha word exactly in the same way.
It was earlier Yaugika word representing name of a rishi with the proper Prakriti Pratyay Vibhaga and meaning. And then somebody named their company as Patanjali, and suddenly now it has become a Yaugika Rudha. So if we allow this kind of circus, then whole 4 group-based classification will completely collapse, and it will not really make any sense, because every word will then become a Yaugika Rudha word in no time. So this was the question, very intelligent question, very appropriate question. And in fact, this is the reason why most of the texts, except for the core grammar texts, most of the other texts will classify the words only in 3 groups: Yaugika, Rudha, and Yoga Rudha. I had briefly mentioned this in the previous class, but let's elaborate. So, for example, there is a book of Sahitya Shastra called Alankara Kaustubha. Alankara Kaustubha has a verse which says, Yoga Rudhascha Yaugikascha Te Tridha. Understand? So this verse classifies the words only in 3 groups: Yoga Rudha, and Yaugika, and it does not mention about Yaugika Rudha words at all. So in this approach, when you take a word, you first decide the meaning in which you want to use that word, and then you put it in the appropriate group. So if you take the word Patanjali, first you ask the question, what is the meaning in which you are using the word Patanjali? If it is the name of the rishi, then the word becomes Yaugika. And if it is some other reference, the name of a person or a brand or something, then it gets classified as Rudha. This is how most of the Shastras will classify the words, but specifically in Vyakarana Shastra, that too in the advanced texts of the Vyakarana Shastra, you will see an explicit classification in the 4th group, Yaugika Rudha words, and that's what I discussed in the previous class. Now, obviously, this is not answering the question that was asked. So, in order to answer the question, we need some level of judgment or viveka to decide what goes in the Yaugika Rudha set. Now, the generally accepted norm in this case is that the words that are quite famous or quite well known in both the meanings are considered as Yaugika Rudha words. So, both the meanings should be equally popular, equally well known in the society. And that is in fact the reason why the textbook examples of Yaugika Rudha words are very limited, like say Ashwagandha, which I just explained, or say Mandapa. Mandapa is also classified as a Yaugika Rudha word. Mandapa has 2 meanings. One, you can actually do a Prakriti Pratyay Vibhaga. Mandam Pibati. Manda means the juice or the oil of the castor tree. So Mandam Pibati, the one who drinks the oil of the castor tree or milk of the castor tree, that person can be called Mandapa, which is the derivational meaning. And obviously there is a Rudha meaning. Mandapa is a decorative room, a pavilion, typically constructed during marriages and so on. So both these meanings are quite famous in the literature, and that's why this Mandapa word gets classified as Yaugika Rudha. Therefore, when you want to classify the words in this Yaugika Rudha section, the Viveka, the judgment that we have to do is that, is this word valid in both the meanings in Sanskrit literature? If yes, then you can put it under Yaugika Rudha words. Otherwise, you decide which meaning you want to use that word in and then classify under the remaining 3 categories. So that's basically I wanted to ask, because the question was asked in this context. Agre gacchamaha. Tadanantaram asmabhihi vyakaranasya laukikani tatha paralaukikani prayojanani drishtani raksha uha agama laghu asandehaha iti tatra bhashyasya vakyam asmabhi adhitam. Out of this, asandehaha, the ability to speak the language without any kind of doubt whether what we are speaking is right or wrong, is the biggest laukika prayojana of Vyakarana as far as we are concerned. And then finally, towards the end of the class, we also saw how Bhartrihari treated Vyakarana as a darshana by learning a few verses from Vakyapadiyam. So that was basically all about the discussion from the previous class. And before I start today's material, if people want to ask any other questions related to the previous class or something related to that, I'll wait for a second. Otherwise, we'll go ahead with the material. Vidyaji.
नमस्ते महोदय, मम एकः प्रश्नः अस्ति। तत्र शब्दानाम् एव विभागः इति मन्यते किल, तत्र यौगिकाः रूढाः इति। मम चिन्तनमस्ति, तत्र अर्थानामपि तत्र किमपि प्रयोगः वर्तते किल, अर्थम् आश्रित्य एव वदामः। तत्र मण्डपः इति मण्डपं, कल्याणमण्डपं वा मण्डपं सूचयति वा, अथवा यः मण्डं पिबति तं सूचयति वा इति। तत्र शब्दानां विषये विभागः अस्ति वा, अर्थस्य विषये अस्ति वा विभागः इति प्रश्नः।
तो मण्डं पिबति इति अर्थस्य विषये एव अस्ति। किमर्थमिति चेत् मण्डप इति शब्दस्य प्रकृतिप्रत्ययविभागम् अनुसृत्य कः अर्थः इति चेत् मण्डं पिबति. So that would be artham anusritya tatra prakritipatte vibhaga. But the kalyana mandap and other things that you are talking, you cannot directly derive that meaning using vyakarana. But I'll answer that question right on the next slide. So just wait for 2 minutes.
Though it is not exactly about the last class, just one personalized question. People say that you learned Vyakarna very fast, within 6 years, without the help of anyone, going through only internet, you learned the subject. And you became a Vyakarna for all Vyakarnas. That's what people say. I don't know. But so how did you go about it? Just briefly explain us.
Yeah, I think we should talk about that separately.
We can also emulate you.
Yeah, we should talk about that separately. Let's first of all study what I wanted to teach today, and then we can talk about this. Okay?
Sure, I think.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for? So the question regarding the artha specifically for the rudha words, that's what I'm going to show on the next slide. So basically, a similar question was actually asked to me on the email, and the question was that we studied. Okay, Rima ji, you have a question?
Yes, sorry. Hi. Okay, so, regarding that question you just asked, the mandapa, the yaugika and rudha. So I'm not sure that would even arise if you knew the context, right? If you had a context, then you wouldn't have the ambiguity.
Correct. And that is the reason why most of these other shastras will classify them into 3 groups. But Vyakarana is trying to give meanings of the words beyond the context. So Nagesha introduces this 4th category and then he gives these 4 categories. So always remember at the back of mind that these 3 are the primary categories. Even if you quote the first 3, that's okay. But as far as we are learning Vyakarana Shastra, so it's my duty to tell you the entire picture. And the entire picture is that there are 4 groups. So I just gave you this.
Right. So the context can help us decide whether.
Correct. The context will always help you decide this. That is correct.
Okay. Astu, dhanyawad.
Anjali Bhagini, you have a question or a comment?
Question. I want to ask Vivekananda athva Ramanujaha. तरी ते योगरूढ शब्दाः वा यौगिकरूढाः?
So for Vivekananda, you have to understand Vivekaha cha Anandaha or Vivekasya Ananda. You have to understand, but mostly names of the human beings are considered Yaugika Rudha, or if you have 3 categories, you will call them as Rudha. That's it. Now, Ramanujam, I don't know. I mean, whether his elder brother was actually called Rama, I don't know. So we need to look into those things and then decide whether it is a Yaugika or a Rudha. But usually names of the humans will be classified into Rudha.
Dhanyawadaha.
Any further questions? We have to extend the class because there is a fixed amount of material I must complete in every class. So I welcome all questions, but more are the questions, longer will be the class. I'm sorry. So, Prarabhamahe. So as I was mentioning, there was a question on email very similar to a question that was asked earlier. So the question was that there are 6 Vedangas that we discussed. And out of those 6 Vedangas, the subject matter of the 3 Vedangas was very clear. So Jyotisha is about planetary mathematics and astronomy. Kalpa is about Vedic rituals and their use in day-to-day life. Chanda is about prosody. It's basically poetry that meets a certain rhythm or rules and so on. But other than these 3, there were 3 more Vedangas which seem to be overlapping a lot. So Shiksha, Vyakaranam and Niruktam. So what is the exact distinction between them? So Shiksha Namakim, Vyakaranam Namakim, Tathacha Niruktam Namakim. And it turns out that this particular distinction is very important for what we are going to learn today. So I would like to spend a few minutes explaining this answer. So on the face of it, it is correct that these three streams have overlapping subject matter. However, there is a fine level of difference between each of them, and the difference is as follows. First one, Shiksha is about the letters and their properties. Varnaha, Varnotpattihi, Varnanam Vibhagaha, Varnanam Uchcharanasthanani, Varneshu Parivartanam. All the things related to the letters is dealt in Shiksha. Then we move one step ahead. Letters get combined to form padas made up of Prakruti and Pratyaya. So that's what Vyakarana is about. Vyakarana goes one level beyond the Shiksha and it talks about the rules of combination of Prakruti and Pratyaya, primarily for deriving the Yogika words and the Yoga Rudha words, where the Prakruti Pratyaya Vibhaga will make some sense. And then comes the Nirukta, which will talk about general derivations even for the Rudha words, where the Prakruti Pratyaya Vibhaga will not make any sense. So those things are also discussed in Nirukta. So that's the answer to your question. And moreover, Nirukta is about Vaidika Shabdanam Vyutpattihi, specifically related to the derivation of the Vaidika words. Artha Nishpattihi. So that's what you were asking. How is Artha derived? That is being discussed in Nirukta. So this way, Nirukta goes even one level above the Vyakarana. It gives some sensible Vyutpatti for the Rudha words by doing multiple tricks of trade or various kinds of circus for achieving that. The whole goal of Nirukta actually is to derive words which cannot be derived using Vyakarana. That's what the name Nirukta means. Nishesha Rupena Uktam. Vyakaranena Yatkimapi Uktam Asti Tad Vihaya Avashishtam Sarvam. Nishesha Rupena Yatra Uchate Tad Niruktam. Yad Vyakaranena Na Uktam Tadapi Vistarena Uktam. And this primarily deals about the Vaidika words. In this context, you also need to know a name called Nighantu. Nighantu is the name of the Vaidika word list. So Vaidika Shabdavali Nighantuhu namna prasiddha asti. Basically, in general, any word list, any lexicon is called Nighantu. In Ayurveda also, this word is very famous. The lexicon of Ayurveda is also called Nighantu, but that's different. Here, it is the Vaidika Shabdavali, which is called Nighantu. And therefore, if you open Nirukta, any book on Nirukta, it will clearly say Niruktam iti Nighantu Bhashyam asti. Nighantu ityukte Vaidika Shabdavali tesham vishaye vivaranam तेषां व्युत्पत्तिः अर्थनिष्पत्तिः च अत्र निरुक्ते उच्यते अतः निरुक्तं निघण्टुभाष्यम् इति नाम्ना अपि प्रसिद्धम् अस्ति. Now this is basically the primary difference between the three Vedangas, and the reason why I spent some time right now explaining this is that before we actually enter the Paninian grammar, we want to spend a few classes on the foundational work which involves understanding the most fundamental concept behind the words, and that is the concept of Varna, which is basically dealt in details in Shiksha, also to some extent in Vyakarana. While the Varnaha is main part of Shiksha, in Vyakarana also it is equally important because Prakruti and Pratyaya, when they are combined, eventually it boils down to some interaction between the Varnas. Some kind of Varna will be introduced, some Varna will be transformed, removed, duplicated, and so on. So I always give this analogy. When you mix water and sugar, on the face of it, it is sugar solution. But internally, it is the molecules or atoms of that sugar which are interacting with the atoms of or molecules of water. In exactly the same way, the letters are like the fundamental constituent building blocks of the words, and these are the letters which undergo the changes. Therefore, it makes sense to understand these letters, how they are created, what are their groups, how they get transformed, and so on. This learning is very fundamental, and it will serve as a foundation for our entire course. And that is the reason we are going to go slow. We are going to go over a lot of details. We will spend 4 classes, 2 this week and 2 next week, starting from today, on this particular topic, the Varnaha. So let's get started with a very, very basic question. What is a Varnaha? And obviously, Kosha will give us the answer. The Koshas give multiple derivations of this word. Varnayati iti varnaha. The one that describes is called varna. Varnyate iti varnaha. The distinguishing character is called varna. Varnyate ityukte rajyate anena. Entity used for coloring is called varna. And we do have various uses of this word varna in the language that match with these derivations. So, for example, one meaning of the varna is the Chaturvarnya, the 4 categories of people: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. Not Kshudra, Shudra. And this basically classifies the society into different groups. So, we can use the derivation Samajaha Bhidyate Bhinneshu Ganeshu iti Varnaha. Yet another meaning of Varna is color. Shukla, Neela, Pita, Rakta, Harita, Kapisha, Chitrani. So derivation here would be varnyate ityukte rajyate anena iti varnaha. The tool with which the objects get color is the varna. Finally, the meaning that is relevant to us right now over here. Varna, the letter of the language. So dhvanim varnayati saha varnaha. The entity that describes a sound is called a varna. You can also use the second derivation. Dhvanihi bhidyate bhinneshu vibhageshu. So sound can be distinguished into different groups by different letters. Saha api varnaha. So it is the single sound energy that is heard as multiple packets of different properties which are called varnaha. So dhvanehe shravana rupena vibhajanam bhavati yena saha varnaha. So this is the basically accepted definition of varna. Now when it comes to this particular way of defining, so dhvani has been divided into multiple components and so on. So the obvious next question is kati varnaha, how many letters? And ironically, it is very hard to give a precise answer to this question. Why? Because भिन्नेषु ग्रंथेषु वर्ण संख्या पृथक पृथक दत्ता अस्ति. The standard Matruka Patha, which everybody of us learns on the first page of Devanagari book, A, A, I, I, K, K, G, and so on. I'm going to show it to you on the next slide. This standard Matruka Patha contains 51 letters. On the other hand, Paniniya Shiksha, obviously it is a book on Varna, so it will list the Varnas and it gives the count as 64. Some other Shikshas give the count as 65. And moreover, we will soon see that there are minor subcategories, Sukshma Bhedaha, between these letters. And depending on whether you count these separately or not, the final number will differ. So varnanam sukshma bhedaha vartante tesham pruthak pruthak pariganam bhavati utana ityanena api varna sankhya vidyate. Sarvesham bhedanam pruthak pruthak gananam kriyate chet ahatya dvisaptatyadhika ekashatam varnaha. 172 letters if you count all the variations separately. And how are all these varnas referred? Etesham nirdeshaha katham bhavati. So remember 2 rules. Most of you might already be aware of this. Varnat karaha and rad iphaha. Prathamaha niyamaha varnat karaha. Kasyapi varnasya nirdeshaha kar iti pratyayasya adharena kriyate. Kar is a pratyaya. So a iti varnasya nirdeshaha akaraha. P iti varnasya nirdeshaha pakaraha. ककारः सकारः अनेन प्रकारेण कार इति प्रत्ययस्य आधारेण वर्णस्य निर्देशः क्रियते. र इति वर्णस्य निर्देशः इफ इति प्रत्ययस्य आधारेण क्रियते. So र plus if becomes रेफ. Special treatment. So we say रेफ. Obviously, कार can also be used for र. अतः र कार is also perfectly acceptable. Absolutely no issues. परंतु सामान्य रूपेण भाषायां र इत्यस्य निर्देशः इफ इत्येव प्रत्ययेन कृतः दृश्यते. Anyway, going to the next slide, this is what I was referring, standard arrangement of letters, also called as matruka pathaha. शब्दानां मूलरूपेण इत्युक्ते मातृरूपेण स्थितानां वर्णानां संकलनम् इति मातृपाठः इति मातृका पाठः. And another reason why it is called Matruka Patha is that it has a deeper significance in the Tantra Shastra, where the sadhaka interacts with the mother goddess using some combinations of these letters. So those of you who might have studied these might already know im, ram, lam, yam, wam, and so on. So these are typically referred as Matruka Bijas. That name also comes from the Matruka Patha. Or maybe the name for this comes from the Matruka Bijas. Either way, but the word Matruka resonates with the fact that these are used in the sadhana of Mother Goddess. Now there is interesting thing about this Matruka Patha also. This Matruka Patha is also not 100% fixed. If you observe, I have not included the last letter Nya, which is present in some of the editions. That's because the standard Matruka Patha only ends at Ksha. But some people include Nya, some include Tra, and so on. And in this Matruka Patha, we also know that the top two rows, we typically refer to them as Swaraha, and the remaining rows, we'll refer to them as Vyanjanani. In these Swaraha, let's read them together. A, A, I, U, R, R. The next is L. There is no R sound. It's not to be pronounced as L. It is L, L, and then A, I, O, Aha are not actually swaras. They are placeholders for the Anuswara and Visarga. I'm going to discuss about them in the few slides. But before we go ahead, I want to discuss something very important. In this context of Matruka Patha, a lot of people actually ask a very peculiar question. They ask, and this is probably many of you might have also have had this question or could have been asked. So why have these complex swaras like Ru or Lu as part of this arrangement? Ru can always be somehow, at least in an approximate manner, be pronounced as R plus U. Similarly, Lu can be pronounced as L plus U. May not be identical pronunciation, but approximate. Similarly, why have these N and Y? Who uses them, where they are used, and so on. And finally, why have this single ksha, which is actually a conjunct letter, k plus sh? So why only include ksha? If you want to include everything else, all possible conjuncts can be included. So why are only these particular entries included in the Matruka Patha? This is a question, and we should think about this, and we should know the answer, given that we are going to use this script or this alphabet throughout our course. So now this question can be answered on two distinct levels. The first level is that we can just raise our hands and say, that's how the language is. No more comments. So we can even go further and say that this is nothing specific to Sanskrit, but other languages like English also have these quirks. So for example, why have C as well as K? What is the point of having Q versus W versus V and so on? So you can always ask these kind of questions to all sorts of languages. In the same way, Sanskrit also has its own quirks. So Ru is a swara, Lu is a swara. There are entities like Ng and Nya. There is a conjunct called Ksha, which is being included in the Matruka Patha, and so on. So this is a perfectly valid answer. There is no issue with this answer. However, in case of Sanskrit alphabet, we can actually give a more logical and sensible answer. Now understand this. unlike all other languages, the letters in Sanskrit are not merely some random sounds. They are distinct packets of energy that were perceived by our rishis and then they were included in the alphabet. And this is in fact the reason why most of our mantras, the Bija mantras, for example, sound like absolutely random combination of letters. Aim, Rim, Klim, Am, Yam, Ram, Lam, Hum, Phat, and so on. But they actually prove to be very effective because it is the energy behind those letters that is being put in the action. Each sound that you utter when you speak those letters generates a specific packet of energy, which when combined with other packets is going to give the positive effect of that mantra on our body or on the surroundings. Therefore, unlike all other languages, the alphabet of Sanskrit is not random. It is far from being random. It is a selectively chosen packets of energy. And these packets were actually seen by our rishis. That's why we call them as seers, and that's why Vyakarana is being called as darshana. They were darshana, to see. So they were seen by our rishis, and then they were included in the alphabet. That is the reason we have those obscure sounds like ru or lu or ksha and so on. Their energy was seen as a distinct packet, useful and effective, and hence it was added. And that is true for absolutely every letter in the Varnamala. When a conjunct letter is just a combination of energies of two packets, there is no need to put it. But when that letter has a separate energy on its own, it was included in the Varnamala. Now you can explore more about this if you're interested in the books on Mantra Shastra. A lot of much more information is available over there. But the bottom line is that each letter in the Varnamala represents a distinct quanta, distinct unit, packet of energy, and that's why it is added in the Matruka Patha. Now this is all about the Matruka Patha. Earlier I mentioned that Paniniya Shiksha lists down 64 different letters. So here are some relevant shlokas of Paniniya Shiksha. Very simple shlokas actually. You should be able to understand the meaning on your own. So Tri Shashtihi Chatushashtihi Va Varnaha Shambhumate Smrutaha. As per Lord Shiva, there are either 63 or 64 letters. See, they are also themselves confused. Why 63 or 64? Because there is this special letter called Pluta Lukara, last entry in the table, Pluta Lukara, that some people consider a Varna, some people don't consider a Varna. So if you include that, it becomes 64, otherwise 63. And how are these 63 or 64 divided? Swaraha Vimshati Rekascha, there are 21 swaras. Sparshanam Panchavimshatihi, there are 25 sparshas or the Vargiya Vyanjanas, K to Ma. Yadayah Smruta Hyashtau, 8 are Ya and other. So Ya, Ra, La, Va, Sha, Sha, Sa, Ha. So these are 8. Chatvarascha Yamaha Smrutaha. There are 4 special letters called Yama. By the way, this Yama has nothing to do with the god of death. Yama over here is a special letter that is used only in the Vedas in a specific context. Even over there is a disagreement in the Pratishakyas. Some people think, some scholars think there are 4 yamas, some others say 16 yamas, some others say 20 yamas. But Paniniya Shiksha lists 4 yamas. And what is this yama sound? It is a sound very similar to how a Vargiya Vyanjana like K or K will be pronounced using a nasal sound. So instead of K, we will say K or something like that. Now I have not studied Vedas. I don't know how to pronounce these yamas, but I'm just giving an example of what I have read from the books. Doesn't really matter at the moment because yamas are not required for us in the Paniniya Vyakarana. It is only seen in the Vedas. But just because it's mentioned over there, I explained. And then there are 4 Anuswaradayaha. So Anuswaro Visargascha Kahpau Chapi Parashritau. So you have Anuswara, you have Visarga, you have Jivhamuliya. So that's this symbol followed by Ka. And then there is Upadhamaniya. Again, this symbol followed by Pa. I'm going to talk about these in next few slides. then dusprishtascha iti vidnyeyaha. There is a special letter again seen only in the Vedas. It is called dusprushtaha. Sometimes it is pronounced as l. So for example, in Rigveda, instead of Agnimide Purohitam, people will say Agnimide Purohitam. So that's the l, which is the dusprushta. Or sometimes it is also pronounced as l. So for example, in Rudra Prashna, there is this line, Sahasrakshaya Midhushe. So in place of Sahasrakshaya Midhushe, sometimes people will speak Sahasrakshaya Midhushe. So that's the L. So even though it's two pronunciations, it's considered single letter called Dusprushta. So adding all these becomes 63, and then some people will consider Pluta Lukara. I'll explain what Pluta is. You don't need to worry about it at the moment. So that all together becomes 64. And these swaras, which 21 swaras are being counted? So A, I, U, Ru. First four swaras, they are considered in groups of three. So Rasva, Dirgha, Pluta. Again, E will be Rasva, Dirgha, Pluta. In tomorrow's class, we are going to precisely learn what a Rasva, what a Dirgha, and what a Pluta means. But let me just tell, because they have mentioned this number 21 over here. So first four swaras, 3 each, so that becomes 12. The next is Lu, that's only one. Rasva, there is no Dirgha, and Pluta is counted towards the end. So that 1 added to 12 becomes 13. And remaining 4, A, I, O, Au, come in two varieties. So there is no Rasva, there is Dirgha or Pluta. So 4 multiplied by 2, 8, added to 13 becomes 21. The mathematics is not important. I just counted it for you. So 21 swaraha, and everything else together, it becomes 64. So this is just for your information, and this is what the Paniniya Shiksha represents. Again, this is not very relevant for us in the Vyakarana. What is relevant for us is here now on this next slide. These are the letters which are actually used in Laukika Samskrita and can be seen referenced in the rules of Ashtadhyayi as far as Varna combinations are concerned. So, Laukika Samskrute Prayuktanam Varnanam Sankalanam. And now, as you can see over here, there are 18 subtypes of Akara. So, A is included in one of those subtypes. You don't count it separately. Then there are 18 Ikara, 18 Ukara, 18 Rukara, 12 of Lakara, Ekara, Aikara, Aukar, Okara, and Aukara. And then there are Vargiya Vyanjanas from Ka to Ma. Then we have this next row called Antasthaha. Ya is of two types, Ra single, La is of two types, and Va is of two types. Then the next line is Ushmanaha. So Sha, Sh, Sa, and Ha. And finally, the last line, we call them as Ayogavahaha. There is Anuswara, there is Visarga, there is Jivhamuliya, and Upadmaniya. The symbol is the same, but the context is always different, so there is never confusion between these. Now we are familiar with most of them, but there is a little bit of additional information that I want to give for each of them. So let's go over these one by one. First is Swaraha. Hopefully everybody knows the definition. Swayam Rajante te Swaraha. They can shine independently. Swayam Rajante. They do not need support of other letters, so we call them Swaraha. In Vyakarana, we typically refer them as Achvarnaha. For the reason I'll explain a little later, but for now, just remember the name Achvarnaha. Tatra, Rikara and Lukara, I told you that these are distinct packets of energy. So, Eto Vishesha Swarau. And why? The Rikara has a component of Rep inside it. What it means in terms of energy is that the packet of the Rikara contains the packet of the Rep inside it. And interestingly, if you remove that packet of Repha sitting inside Rikara and put the packet of Lakara there, suddenly R gets converted to Lu. So Rephasya sthane yada Lakaraha prayujyate tada parivartitaha swaraha Lakaraha namna jnayate. So R has an amsha of R, and L has an amsha of L. We are going to explore this fact at a later point in time when we learn a little bit of sandhis. Then we talk about Vyanjanas. Vyajate iti Vyanjanam. That's the Vyutpatti. Vyajate means gets followed. So gets followed by whom? Gets followed by swaras. So swaraihi vyajate, or let's take one swara because there'll be only one swara at the moment. So swarena vyajate iti Vyanjanam. The basic idea over here is that in most of the cases, the Vyanjana will need a swara. Even if it's a conjunct, 2 or 3 Vyanjanas together, they will eventually need a swara at the end for their complete pronunciation. And in Vyakarana, we refer to them as Hal Varnaha. So again, remember this term, Ach is for swara, Hal is for Vyanjana, and these Vyanjanas Pramukhyena ete eva arthabodhakaha santi iti uchyate. So Vyanjanas are the primary entities that impart some meaning to the word. In other words, even if you omit the vowels or even if you make mistakes in the vowels, you can still guess the meaning of the word at least to some level of certainty if Vyanjanas are intact. Now, most of you might be aware of this exercise in English, that you take a word, say water, W-A-T-E-R, and get rid of the vowels and just retain the Vyanjanas, W-T-R, and you can still guess that the word represents water. This is exactly what we see over here also, that even if there is a mistake in the swaras, as long as most of the Vyanjanas are intact, you will be able to get some meaning from that word. That is the reason why making mistakes like Raswa and Dirgha are acceptable. Acceptable in the sense not grammatically acceptable, but in day-to-day writing, we can ignore them because we can still understand that statement which has those Raswa Dirgha mistakes to some extent. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this, but on a general scale, it is the Vyanjanas that will impart the meaning. Vyanjanani eva pramukhyena artha vishesha bodhakani. By the way, remember, swaraha is pullingam, Vyanjanam is napumsakalingam. Now let's go to these Vyanjanas again. I want to show this Matruka Patha once again because there is some very interesting information about these Vyanjanas that I want to discuss. We are running out of time, but as I said, I want to finish up today's material, so the class will get extended. If you have some other commitments, feel free to disconnect and then you can watch the recording. So these Vyanjanas are fundamentally classified into 3 groups. Let's go to this other slide. It's better represented over here. So the Vyanjanas are fundamentally classified into 3 groups. In the center, the 25 entities that we see classified into a matrix of 5 by 5, we call them Vargiya Vyanjanani. Most of you know these things, but there are things that are going to be very interesting and you don't know, so pay attention. So these are Vargiya Vyanjanani, and then they are further classified into 5 vargas depending on the first letter. So Ka varga, Sh varga, Ta varga, Ta varga, and Pa varga. So that's how these rows are named. Then the next one, there are 2 rows. The first row, Ya, Ra, La, Va, this row is referred to as Antasthaha. Anta, then there is a Visarga, and then there is Thaha. Antasthaha. Ekvachanam is Antastha, Bahuvachanam is Ekvachanam is Antasthaha, Bahuvachanam is Antasthaha. Kaha arthaha? Antaha means madhye. Madhye tishtanti te antasthaha. These are the letters that sit in between. In between of whom? Not in between of Vargiya Vyanjanas and the Shasha Saha. I'm not talking about sitting arrangement in the ordering. I'm talking about sitting arrangement in the pronunciation. What it actually means is that the these antasthas, they, on the dimension of pronunciations, they sit in between the swaras and the vyanjanas, which means that they share a lot of characteristic with the swaras and a few characteristics with vyanjanas. It is as if, suppose for example, you're traveling from one state to another, say Maharashtra to Karnataka. On the cities that are on the border, there'll be people who will speak a mix of Kannada and Marathi. So it's exactly like that. These are on the boundary and they will have a lot of properties similar to swaras and then some more properties similar to vyanjanas. And how do we know this? We know this because when you try to pronounce these letters, you can distinctly hear a swara component being pronounced. Here is an exercise. You can try it on your own. Don't unmute yourself. Just try it on your own with muted. So try pronouncing any of these four letters, but only partially for an elongated time. Don't pronounce them completely. Pronounce only partially, but for elongated time, and you will invariably hear a swara. So here is an example. Let me try to pronounce ya partially, not fully. See this, and I want to pronounce it for the elongated time. So see this. You will invariably hear the E swara. Similarly for R, you will hear the Ru swara. For W, you will hear the U swara. So in this way, elongated pronunciation of all these letters will invariably cause a swara to be spoken. This is not magic. This is not coincidence. There is a reason behind it. We are going to learn it in the next week. But this is the fundamental reason why they are called antahasthaha. They share the properties of swaras and vyanjanas. They naturally blend on each of the side. And that is even the reason when all of you know what a yana sandhi is. So when you start doing the yana sandhi, let's take iti and api. Start speaking iti and api together without actually doing the sandhi. Just speak it sequentially without any gap, and that e at the end of iti will automatically get converted to ya. Iti api, iti api, iti api. When you keep on speaking it like this, at one point in time you'll hear a ya, because the properties of ya are extremely similar to that of e, and same goes for the other antastha letters as well. So that's all about the antasthaha. The next four, sh, sh, s, and h, are called ushmanaha. Understand, the pratipadika is ushman. There is a dirgha ukara. I think it's written on the slide over here. See, this is the pratipadika. This is the word ushmanaha. The pratipadikam is ushman. It runs as ushma, ushmanam, ushmanaha, ushmanam, ushmanam, ushmanaha. So on the website, you can actually search for this. Click on the Shabda Patha, add a filter, search for this Sanyoga Purva Mannanta, Sanyoga Purva Mannanta, because it is sh plus ma. So select this, and there is no ushman, but there is a similar word somewhere over here. Shushman is there. So just like Shushman, you can run Ushman. So Ushma, Ushmano, Ushmanaha, and so on. And why are they called Ushmanaha? Because it is a strong breath, Ushma, that comes out of the mouth while pronouncing these letters. Now there is another interesting thing about these Ushman letters. And in order to understand that, we have to go back and think about how these vyanjanas are actually pronounced. So I have already mentioned that when it comes to the pronunciation of the antastha letters, y, r, l, v, there is actually a swara component in the initial part, and then there is a vyanjana. I mean, it's not technically a swara plus a vyanjana, but when you start pronouncing it, that energy is aligned in such a way that there is a swara component that is heard in the beginning. For other vyanjanas, that the Vargiya vyanjanas, if you pronounce them for an elongated time, you will hear a swara component at the end. So try pronouncing ka, for example, for an elongated time, and eventually an akara will be heard. Say, there will be an akara heard at the end. And that is true for all the Vargiya vyanjanas. So for the antasthas, the elongated pronunciation starts with a swara, whereas for Vargiya vyanjanas, the elongated pronunciation ends with a swara. The ushmanas are the letters which you can actually pronounce for an elongated time without hearing any kind of swara. The sound of Vyanjan will be completely heard all the way. Try this out. Or s. There is no akara or any other letter heard. So the sound of Vyanjana is heard throughout. So in this way, as I mentioned earlier, that if you do an ordering based on the similarity, there will be swaras in the top, then there will be antasthas, which are on the border of swaras and Vyanjanas. Then there will be Vargiya Vyanjanas, and all the way towards the end will be the Ushman letters, which are farthest from the swaras. And this is exactly the basis of creating these three groups in our Varnamala. People could have just combined all of them like ABCD in a single line. The reason why these groups are created is because of this difference. Yara Lava becomes one group, Shasha Saha becomes another group. The Vargiya Vyanjanas, even there, each row is a separate group. We are going to learn about this in much more details in the upcoming classes. And then there are other names as well, which you will come across at some point in time. So Karkasha Vyanjanani, Mrudu Vyanjanani, Alpa Pranaha, Mahapranaha. So hopefully everybody knows these. If you don't know, note it down. Karkasha Vyanjana, the first and the second column. So Ka Cha Ta Ta Pa, Kha Cha Tha Tha Pa are Karkasha Vyanjanas. In addition, only Sha, Sh and S. So not her, only sh, and s are karkasha vyanjanas. Every other thing is mrudu vyanjanas. So I'm talking about vyanjanas. So g, and so on. Everything is mrudu vyanjanas. And then there is another term which you are hopefully aware, alpa prana versus mahaprana. So column 1, column 3, column 5 are called alpa prana. Column 2, column 4 are called mahaprana. Sh, all the ushmanas are also mahapranas, and all the antasthas are alpa pranas. So if you don't know this, listen to the recording and write this down. It's a matter of just writing and remembering. The reason or the use of these we are going to see when we start learning more rules about the letters as we start studying Ashtadhyayi. Anyway, so that was mainly about the Vyanjanas. Let's go ahead. I have to discuss many more things. So let's move to Ayogavahas. So out of the Ayogavahas, there are 4 of them actually. Anuswara, Visarga, Jivhamuliya and Upadhmaniya. Prarabhamahe. Kim nama Anuswaraha iti chet? Nasika margena bahihi agataha kaschana makara sadrushaha dhvanihi. Understand, it is not makara. Makara will require nasika as well as the lips, oshtau. Anuswara does not require lips. It is a purely nasal sound. Kevalam nasikayaha prayogaha bhavati. An interesting point about the Anuswaras, in general about all Ayogavahas, but mainly about Anuswara, is that Anuswaraha Vyanjanam va swaro va. You can include Anuswara in Vyanjanas as well as in Swaras. We are going to refer to this fact a little later in our course. For now, just remember this point. The next comes Visarga. Uraf Pradeshat Bahihi Agataha Hakara Sadrishaha Dhvanihi. It comes out of the chest, similar to Hakara. So Ayamapi Swarat Anantaram Eva Shruyate. In a Shiksha called Yajnavalkya Shiksha, there is a detailed description of how Visarga should be pronounced. So Yatha Balasya Sarpasya Nishwaso Lahuchetasaha Evam Ushma Prayoktavya Hakara Parivarjita. Ushma means Visarga. How is the Visarga to be pronounced? Yatha Balasya Sarpasya Nishwasaha. How a baby snake exhales. In that way, the Visarga should be pronounced without pronouncing Hakara. Hakara Parivarjita. Then there is the third one, Jivhamuliya. Hopefully you all know this, but if you don't know, listen carefully. It is a special sound that is heard in place of a Visarga when the Visarga is followed by either K or Kh. In no other case, only when the Visarga is followed by K or Kh, there is a special sound that comes in place of Visarga. How is that sound? It is like the Parsi letter Kh, Kh. Not the normal Kh, but Kh. something like that. So it is pronounced using the back of the tongue. Hence, it's called Jivvamuliya. And it is indicated with this half circle on the top and half circle on the bottom sign. So for example, Ramah Karoti, or I forgot writing that symbol over here, Ramah Khadati. So that's the Jivva Mulya, and it is optional. So you can say Ramaha Khadati with a Visarga, or you can say Ramah Khadati with the Jivva Mulya. The last one is Upadmaniya, very similar to Jivha Mulya, but it comes in place of Visarga when the next letter is Pa or Pha. So remember, Jivha Mulya is when the next letter is K or Kh. The Upadmaniya is when the next letter is Pa or Kh. So Visargat anantaram pakaraha phakaraha va drishyate che Visargasya sthane kasyachana Fa sadrisha. So again, this is a Farsi letter Fa. Sanskrit does not have Fa. Sanskrit only has Ha. When you speak Pha, the lips must close momentarily. Pha and not Fa. That Fa is this particular Farsi letter which is used in place, which is used like a sound of Upadmaniya. So Rama Pathati, Rama Phalati or Druma Phalati and so on. So again, this is optional. You can pronounce a Visarga or you can pronounce an Upadmaniya. So this is basically a running commentary on these four Ayogavahas. Those of you who want to know more can of course go in the Shiksha Shastra and understand more about this. But basic description is what I have given over here. Now at this stage, before going ahead, I have a bunch of more slides. I would like to cover them today. But before going ahead, I want to spend a few minutes on explaining something very important. Many of you might also be aware of yet another arrangement of letters called Maheshwara Sutrani. Now, if you don't know what Maheshwara Sutrani is, perfectly fine. We will learn it in the course. But those of you already know it, I just want to burst out some bubbles, so understand this. Maheshwara Sutrani is not a standard arrangement of letters. It is definitely logical, very useful, but the fundamental purpose of Maheshwara Sutrani is not to enumerate the letters of the language systematically. Rather, the purpose of Maheshwara Sutrani is simply to arrange letters in such a way so as to facilitate the creation of Ashtadhyayi Sutras. And that is the reason why those letters are grouped into 14 sutras of different sizes. Their order is messed up, and then you can see those special letters at the end like Ayuna, Luka, and so on. So the entire logic behind these quirks, this weird arrangement, is to facilitate the creation of Ashtadhyayi Sutras. And this also means that Maheshwara Sutrani are closely tied to Panini's grammar. These sutras do not have a significance beyond the Paninian grammar. Each grammar is free to create their own arrangement of letters, which will facilitate the creation of sutras of that grammar, just like the way the arrangement called Maheshwara Sutrani facilitates the sutras of Ashtadhyayi. So Maheshwara Sutrani is not a standard arrangement. The standard arrangement, the universally accepted arrangement of the letters is the Matruka Patha. And that is the reason why I don't want to teach Maheshwara Sutrani today. We will learn Maheshwara Sutrani at the right point in the course where I will be teaching the techniques used by Panini to create his grammar. So out of many techniques that he has used to create his sutras, one technique is Maheshwara Sutras, and I'll elaborate on that at that point in time. So let's go ahead, probably 15 more minutes. Please be patient. Or maybe we can cover these next two slides in. Let's take them. Very simple, actually. So I want to discuss two more concepts: concept of akshara and concept of sanyoga. Actually, very simple concepts. Within 5 minutes, we should be able to finish them off. So what is an akshara? Akshara is not necessarily synonym of a varna. A varna is a single letter. Ka, kha, ga is a varna. Whereas akshara is anya varnaihi sah athava anya varnaihi vina vidyamanaha swaraha. So a swara is fundamentally called as an akshara, which can be tagged along with a few vyanjanas along with it. So for example, a is an akshara. Ka, the full ka, which is ka plus a, is an akshara because there is one swara called a which is tagged with a vyanjana. If you take it is also one akshara because there is one swara followed by one vyanjana. Vyanjanas do not count. Only swaras have to be counted. Vyanjanas will be tagged along with them. So tam is two aksharas. Sorry, tam is also one akshara because there is a swara a which is sandwiched between ta and ma. Tra is also one akshara. There is a swara at the end and there are two vyanjanas before that. Finally, maha is also one akshara because there is a swara a and then there is ayogavaha on one side and a vyanjana on other side. So there must be one swara and other entities which are non-swaras and it will be called an akshara. And when you have a word and you want to divide that word into the aksharas, the general rule is that shabde vidyamanani vyanjanani samanya rupena tesham anantaram vidyamanasya swarasya aksharasya adharena svikriyante. So for example, if you want to break the word Krishnaya into aksharas, Kru will be one akshara, Shna will be another akshara, and Ya will be third akshara. Understand that this half sh, it actually has a nearest swara to the left. Just before the sh, there is a ru. But a vyanjana will always be associated with the swara that comes after as long as such an association is possible. So, shabde vidyamanani vyanjanani tesham anantaram vidyamanasya swarasya angarupena svikriyante. So, sh and n both will be associated with a, so that becomes shna, and ya, so that's aksharatrayam. If you take the word nadim, then it is na and dim. The ma doesn't have a swara after it, so it gets associated with the swara before it. So, yadi anantaram swaraha na vidyate, tarhi tani vyanjanani purvam vidyamanasya swarasya aksharasya angarupena svikriyante. So, ma will be tagged along with the e before that, so that dim is the second akshara. The next concept that I want to discuss is sanyoga. Again, most of you know this. Sware swaram vina vidyamanani vyanjanani sanyoga iti namna jnayante. A sannipata means coming together of multiple vyanjanas without a swara is called a sanyoga, and you can have many vyanjanas in the sequence. So agni ityatra gakara nakara sanyoga asti. बुद्ध्या इत्यत्र दकार धकार यकार संयोगः अस्ति. सूर्क्ष्यति इत्यत्र रेफ ककार शकार यकार संयोगः अस्ति. Count along with me if you can. कार्त्स्न्यम् इत्यत्र रेफ तकार सकार नकार यकार संयोगः अस्ति. तिलांस्त्र्यावपति, तिलान स्त्री आवपति. By doing sandhi it becomes tilan stryavapati. Ityatra nakara takara sakara takara repha yakara sanyoga asti. So there is an example that contains 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 letters as a sanyoga. And the interesting point is that when you have such multiple letters, any random pairing or combination can be called a sanyoga on its own. So if you take this surkshati for example, then there is repha kakara shakara yakara sanyoga, but repha kakara component can also be called a sanyoga. Kakara shakara can also be called a sanyoga. Shakara yakara can also be called a sanyoga. Repha kakara shakara together can also be called a sanyoga. Kakara shakara yakara itself can be called a sanyoga. So any set of vyanjanas need not be full. Two or more vyanjanas coming together is called a sanyoga. So in surkshati, so that's the rule actually. Yatra sanyoge त्रीणि अथवा अधिकानि व्यञ्जनानि विद्यन्ते तत्र समूहस्य तु संयोगसंज्ञा भवति एव, परन्तु द्वयोः अथवा अधिकानाम् अपि पृथक्त्वेन संयोगसंज्ञा भवति. And for surkshati, I have listed all the possible sanyogas. Now, before we end this class, maybe 5 or 7 more minutes, I want to spend a little time on explaining the process of how these letters or the sounds are actually generated from our mouth. So, Varnanam Utpattihi Katham Bhavati. And there is a set of rules or shlokas in Paniniya Shiksha which describe this 5-step process. Atma buddhya sametyarthan mano yungte vivakshaya manah kayagnimahanti saprerayati marutam marutasturasi charan mandam janayati swaram. Very simple actually. 5 steps are being explained over here. The first step is Atma buddhya sametya. Kam sametya? Arthan sametya. So Atma buddhya arthan sametya. The Atma is the main karta behind all this process. This Atma Arthan buddhya samiti. It collects all the thoughts with help of buddhi, with help of intellect. Buddhya, it should be tritiya. No, buddhyaha sahayena. That's okay. So ayam atma vachyan arthan buddhyaha sahayena ekatri karoti. So this is the first step. Atma buddhya arthan sametya Vivakshaya manah yungte. Then this Atma, in order to express the thoughts using the words, it employs the mind in that work. Tan arthan shabdarupena prakatikartum saha Atma manovrittim niyunakti. It employs the mind in that activity. Once the mind is involved, manah kayagnimahanti. The mind ignites the Jataragni. Nyuktam manaha Jataragnim uddipayati saha marutam prerayati. That fire then forces the prana present in the chest to move up. So ayam Jataragni urasi vidyamanam pranavayum prerayati, and that preritaha vayu urasi charan mandam swaram janayati. And that pranavayu, when it starts moving up from the chest, it first passes through the vocal cords. See the diagram. When that pranavayu starts moving up the throat or up the chest, first it passes the 2 vocal cords, tantriyau. First it passes the vocal cords, and then it hits one of the organs of speech, the ones that I have highlighted in the bold font. So it will either hit kantha, strike that area, kantha, or jivha, or danta, or oshtha, murdha, talu, nasika. It will hit over there, and based on the speed, the direction, the angle in which it hits, a different kind of sound is produced that comes out of the mouth. Such a beautiful and detailed process of creation of sound is elaborated in our Shiksha. It starts all the way from the Vivaksha of Atma, and it ends all the way at the end of mouth, at the end when the sound comes out of mouth. What matters for us in the further discussion in detail is what happens when that Vayu from the chest starts moving upwards. So Atma Buddhya Sametya Arthan Mano Vivaksha Yungte and so on is fine. But when that Vayu starts moving up from the chest, how it passes through the vocal cords, what happens at that time, how does it hit Jivva, Kantha, Nasika, Talu, Murdha, lips, Dantaha, and so on, what all happens and how is this sound produced, that is what we are going to learn in significant details in next 2 or 3 classes. And before we conclude, the Paniniya Shiksha also describes 5 ways of classifying these letters based on all these properties, like how are they generated, what is the angle of hitting, which organ they hit, and so on. Based on that, Paniniya Shiksha classifies the letters into 5 distinct ways These are not groups. Please understand. These are ways of classification. So you can say kalam anusrutya varna vibhagaha. If you take the dimension of kala, the time of pronunciation in picture, you can classify the letters as rasva versus dirgha versus pluta. If you take, say, the swara, swara doesn't mean ach letters. There is something else called swara, which I'll explain in tomorrow's class. But with that particular property, you can classify the letters as udatta, anudatta, and swarita. Based on the actual place of hitting, like kantha, talu, murdha, and so on, the letters are classified into kanthya, talavya, murdhanya, and so on. The way they hit, the force that helps us classification into sprushta, ishat sprushta, ishat vivrutta, and so on. And the way this vayu passes through that vocal cord, tantryu, two of them, so dvivachana, based on that, we classify the letters as nadinaha, shvasinaha, alpapranaha, bahupranaha, mahaprana, not bahuprana, mahapranaha. So that's anupradhanam anusrutya varna vibhagaha. So there is this verse in Paniniya Shiksha, Swaratah kalatah sthanat prayatnat anupradhanatah iti varnavidah prahuhu nipunam tannibodhata. 5 styles of classification based on either kala, swara, sthana, prayatna or anupradhana. I'll explain all these in the next 3 or 4 classes. And why do you want to learn this? It is not theoretical. This has immense application when we go to Paniniya Vyakarana. So for example, all of us know this Purva Savarna Sandhi. I mean, hopefully, all are expected to know Purna Savarna Sandhi. Tad plus Hita becomes Tadhita. Vak plus Hari becomes Vaghari. So this Purva Savarna Sandhi is based on this last category, Anupradhanam Anusrutya Varna Vibhagaha. Other types of ach sandhis like guna sandhi and vruddhi sandhi are based on the sthanam anusrutya and prayatnam anusrutya varna vibhagaha. And it's not just about sandhis, but you can find the application of these classifications at multiple places in Paniniya Vyakarana. A trivial thing like whether a dhatu is a parasmaipadi or atmanepadi or ubhayapadi, this can be understood by using Swaram Anusrutya Varna Vibhagaha, Udatta, Anudatta, Swarita, and so on. So the bottom line over here is that we need to understand the intricacies of these classes in details, and that's why we are going to go slow, probably spend 3 or more classes. If there are more questions, an additional class also I can take, but we need to make sure that these concepts are thoroughly clear before we can even enter the first sutra of Ashtadhyayi. And that's what, so these 5 classes are going to be our central theme, along with this diagram, the organs of pronunciation and all that. That's going to be our central theme starting from tomorrow's class. So let's stop here for today. We will have a class as usual tomorrow. Here is the homework for today. Now I'll not read out the homework because we are running out of time, but I'll link the homework from the course page. Here is a reminder, doing homeworks is compulsory. A lot of you have already submitted. So thanks for that. I'll check them over the weekend and get back to you. Today's homework and the tomorrow's homework, I'll announce the deadline separately on the group. So that's all for today. The recording and the material will be uploaded on the course page. Now I will wait if there are any questions, but we have already run out of time. So if there are no questions, people are free to exit. If you have any questions, you can raise hand and I'll discuss more. Otherwise, we will stop, do the Mangalacharanam and conclude. Okay, so looks like there are no questions. So thank you very much. Let's do the Mangalacharanam and conclude, and we will meet again tomorrow. अष्टाध्यायी जगन्माता यस्य चित्तात् समुत्थिता वेदानामुपकाराय तस्मै पाणिनये नमः. शब्द ब्रह्म समाराध्य कृतवान्यो विलक्षणं सर्वाश्चर्यमिदं शास्त्रं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः. येन धौता गिरः पुंसां विमलैः शब्दवारिभिः तमश्चाज्ञानजं भिन्नं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः. धन्यवादः.